So in the last video, we talked about how what Morgan observed in his experiments was that it seemed there were certain genes that appeared to be linked to the sex of the flies. And we've now observed there are many different sex-linked genes, and these genes exhibit unique patterns of inheritance that are different than those that Mendel observed with his simple P crosses. So the members of the pair of sex chromosomes we know can have correlations with the behavior of two different alleles. In this case, we're going to examine the eye color gene, but there are some others. So we know that there are humans and other animals, and specifically mammals, have two types of sex chromosomes. So there's a larger X chromosome and a smaller Y chromosome. And women, we know, females by biology have two X's, and males by biology have an X and a Y. Only the ends of the Y chromosome have regions that are homologous with the corresponding regions of the X chromosome. So there's short parts at the either end of the Y chromosome that can pair up with the X chromosome. Each egg receives one X chromosome, and each sperm half receive X and half receive Y, depending on what the dad decides to give. That's how we get girls with XX, dad with XY, and then we end up seeing each of those can give one. The anatomical signs of sex develop when the embryo is about 2 months old. So there is a gene known as the SRY gene, which stands for sex determining region of Y gene. And that gene is located only on the Y chromosome. This gene stimulates the development of the testes. So if there is no SRY gene, aka no Y chromosome, then the testes will not develop. So this is a picture of what the X looks like. You can see it's quite large, the Y quite small. Females, like I said, are XX, and males contain XY, and each egg, no matter what, contains an X because of that fact, and male sperm can either contain an X or a Y. There are other animals with different methods of sex determination, but we'll focus on those that use the X and the Y for now. A gene that is located on either sex chromosome is known as a sex-linked gene. And as you saw, the Y chromosome is quite small, so there are some genes located on the Y chromosome that is called Y-linked genes, and there are very few of those. But there are quite a few genes that are found on the X chromosome, and those are called X-linked genes, and we'll see a lot of those. Most Y-linked genes help determine sex. The Y chromosome is passed virtually intact from a father to all of his sons. So because the chromosome is so small, it pretty much gets passed on just as exactly as it was. But the X chromosome carries a lot of genes since it's larger, and many of those genes code for characteristics that are not related to the sex of the animal. X-linked genes follow specific patterns of inheritance, and so for a recessive X-linked trait to be expressed, the female who is being born needs to have 2 copies of the allele. She needs to be homozygous, just like a normal recessive trait. However, the male only needs 1 copy of the allele to express the trait. So we call this hemizygous because since it's not really possible for him to have the X and the X. If he has the X and he has the recessive trait on his X chromosome and a Y, we call him hemizygous. And he will express if he only has 1 copy of the allele. So because of that, X-linked recessive disorders are much more common in males than in females. So you can see here, this is an example of a recessive X-linked disorder. If we have a dominant purebred mother and a recessive purebred father, you can see if his sperm can either give us the recessive trait on the X or a Y, and then we can, from the mom, we're going to get the dominant trait in both cases. So you can see here, because we have the X and the X for the daughter, since she has that dominant trait, she is going to be normal phenotypically. The male is also going to be normal phenotypically because he got the dominant trait from each parent. Now, if we cross, if we do another cross here with, say, one of the hybrid moms and another male who's normal, we're going to see that we could get two daughters who are both phenotypically normal, one of whom may be a carrier, a normal son, and then I'll wait till Google leaves. Down here, you can see there's going to be an affected son by the disorder because he only gets one X gene from the mother and the other is a Y that doesn't carry the trait. So he is going to express that trait. With our mother who is, if we cross a mother who is heterozygous with another male who's affected by the trait, you can see in this case, we're actually going to then get a daughter who is affected and a son who's affected. But we really can only get an affected daughter if we have a carrier and an affected male, because she has that other X to protect her, so to speak. Whereas the man, if he gets the X with the gene, he's going to express it. There are quite a few disorders caused by recessive alleles on the X chromosome in humans. So remember, if it's located on the X chromosome, that means that it's going to be much more common in males than females. One is color blindness. So many types of color blindness are X-linked. The most common is red-green color blindness. So you should talk to your male friends and see, or brothers, fathers, etc., if any of them are colorblind. Another X-linked recessive trait is Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is a disease that is a progressive weakening of the muscles, and it is located on a specific location on the X chromosome. And yet another X-linked disorder is hemophilia. So this is the absence of one or more proteins required for blood clotting. So the word hemo root means blood, philia means love, so this disease technically means blood love, because the people who are affected by hemophilia have blood clot problems because of the absence of that protein. They tend to bleed out to some extent, and even small minor cuts, scratches, bruises, etc. can cause a lot of bleeding compared to a non-affected person. So these three disorders are some examples of sex-linked traits, and like the book has mentioned, these are much more common in males. We studied hemophilia a lot by examining the pedigrees of the royal family in England and several other royal families. And you will see, if you examine those pedigrees, that hemophilia was passed on pretty readily because of all of the intermarrying that the royal families did back in the day when they wanted to protect their bloodline. Ironically, in protecting their bloodline, they mostly came down with a blood disease. But that just kind of gives you an idea of how genes can be passed on when they're linked specifically to the sex chromosome. In the next section, we're going to talk about other ways that genes can be linked in addition to the sex chromosome linkage.